Is India heading towards digital colonialism? And if so, what can Bharat do to regain its technological destiny? Something that I call Digital Swaraj. The idea of Digital Swaraj is that India does not depend on any other country for its technology and innovation, and at the same time is a leading country in technology and innovation. So that's what this video is about. Now, recently you must have seen in the news where Microsoft blocked access to Nayara Energy. If you think this is out of the way, out of the blue, then you are wrong, because this is just a wake-up call. India, for many years, in fact for many centuries, even before the British came the first time, has not been technologically growing or not innovating. And because of that, we are now heading towards possibly again back to colonialism. So the objective of this video is to revisit history and not make the same mistakes again and learn from history. So if we do not change and continue in the same path, there is a chance that we will be going back to this era of colonialism, this whole idea of teen guna lagan, and where the whole society is controlled from some foreign powers. Alternatively, we can change path and decide to move towards this idea of digital Swaraj, as I explained, where we are technologically independent and leading. So this video is just going to be focused on answering the question whether we are heading back to digital colonialism. And our next couple of videos, I'll talk about what digital Swaraj looks like. I'll introduce a sort of framework where we can put all the different elements in play in a systematic manner and talk about things in a more systematic and meaningful manner. And after that, we can do have another video on exploring different scenarios to actually see how we can go into digital Swaraj. So this is what the focus of this video is going to be. Before that, let me just introduce myself. I'm just a concerned citizen. This is the first time I'm ever making a video, and I don't typically make videos and things like that. I work in the field of AI. I have a PhD in AI and quantitative behavioral finance. So I'm quite interested in psychology and technology and how AI influences our behavior and how our behavior is manipulated and things like that. And so that's what I did my PhD in. I'm a nuclear engineer. I did my bachelor's in nuclear engineering, and I'm quite aware of different technologies and things like that. I've studied innovation and innovation diffusion too, how innovation is created, how it disperses amongst the masses, how it is adopted by different people and things like that. That's a science of its own, and I enjoy that quite a lot. So to start off, yesterday's British Empire was built by ships, and the empire that is being built today is being built by chips, right? So I found that pretty funny, the idea of ships and chips, right? So many things that happened during the colonial time are again repeating today, and there is a lot of similarity between the past. First, I already talked about this idea of ships and chips. In both cases, the West innovated. In the colonial times, they created the steam engine. Based on that, they were able to create ships, these sort of physical vessels. And based on that, they were able to bring their goods, their weapons, and their soldiers into India. Same thing is happening again, where the West innovated and created the silicon chip. And based on that, they are able to create products such as servers, phones, laptops, software, AI, all these new technologies, and the standards that come along with that. So they are setting the standards for all of that, and they are the ones bringing it into India. The key takeaway here is that they are the ones coming to us after innovating, and we are only being reactive, and we are just responding, as consumers. So India seems to be lacking this sort of innovation and this sort of expansionist spirit. We don't have that, something we need to inculcate. Another similarity is this idea of company Raj. So previously you had East India Company, and they were the ones who would determine the standards. They were the ones who would uh, be it civil service, military, law, medicine, education, they were the ones who would be setting the standards and things like that. And in modern times, it's the same thing. You have these big tech companies who coming into the country, and they are the ones deciding who gets to use their services, how they get, how to use their services and things like that. So they have this control over the economy and over the region basically. Another interesting similarity is that the East India companies, they were the ones that you wanted, the top talent would go to get a job, right? They were the dream employers. And the same thing is happening today, where you have the big four, MBB, or these FANG companies. So everyone wants to get employed by them. So again, that's another similarity. Then another is this idea of monopolies. So when the British did come last time, they controlled the trade routes, they dictated the prices, they controlled the tax, they set the tax, they controlled who gets to grow what. You must remember Mahatma Gandhi's, salt march. So Indians were not allowed to even get their own salt. So the West controlled that. They controlled who gets to grow what crops. So they would grow crops which were not useful for the country but useful for them, like tea and things like that. So they were able to export tea back to their their empire and things like that. And now you have this sort of platform monopoly. So it's a very similar, where the digital supply chain is controlled by the West. So they get to control what apps go on their store, who gets to access their clouds services, as we are seeing in this Nayara incident recently, who gets to use their web stores and things like that. So the supply chain is also controlled largely by the Western companies again. So we are again putting ourselves in that same sort of monopoly sort of situation which is forming. This is not happening in countries like China, etc. Right? So China has its own indigenous tech companies, so there is no Western monopoly over there. Another similarity is this idea of extraction of resources. So when the British came, they were heavily focused on extracting raw goods from India, and India lost a lot of wealth in the process, got nothing in return. And the same thing is happening today, where a lot of our data is being extracted by the West. And today data is king, right? And I can make another video on the economics of data, but data is more valuable today than raw resources. Right? With data, you must have seen this Cambridge Analytica incident. You can swing elections using data. You can manipulate behavior using data. You can control fashion using data, right? So what becomes fashionable, not just in terms of clothes, but even in terms of thinking, ideology, and in terms of which goods and services to buy, etc. So data is extremely valuable, and that is just being taken out without much Indian oversight, I believe. As I mentioned, we can talk about this in another video, but one important point here is data in itself is not very valuable, right? So what is more valuable is the sort of patterns that can be extracted from the data. So once I've extracted these sort of patterns from the data, I don't even need the data. So these patterns which dictate how we think and our behavior and things like that, once they get extracted, then we are really in, basically the West knows us better than we do. And that's extremely dangerous position to be in. Then there's this idea of the West coming and selling their branded goods back to us back in the day, right? So they would take Indian cotton and then put their stamp on it and send back these sort of pants and shirts and suits and ties. That wasn't the way Indians used to dress back then, but that became fashionable, and the Indian handloom industry was destroyed, and their branded clothes became desirous, like glamorized. Everyone wanted to wear that. And again, the same thing is happening today, where you have the West selling their branded goods, their hardware, their apps, their iPhones or their phones. So if I asked you, if money is no bar, which phone you would buy, definitely you wouldn't say Indian phone. You would probably say some Western phone like iPhone or something like that. So again, those goods and services are glamorized. You like Western cars. You don't really. I mean, you prefer to buy a Western car versus a Indian car most of the time, right? If you can afford it. So again, we are still buying their branded goods. Then what happens is you lose control of your communication channels, right? So in the colonial times, they control the telegraphs, railroads, newspapers, who gets to travel, right? Rail ships, everything was controlled by them. And in fact, there used to be a law in as late as late 1800s, I believe, where the British could decide to close down any local newspaper if they, for any reasons, no trial needed. And again, you have very similar situation today where the West controls the social media completely. They control the search engines, they control the AI. So the information you get when you search for something or you ask AI for anything is decided by them. They control that. And if there are any, like I keep seeing it on X or Twitter, that some Indian YouTuber will keep complaining that he got demonetized or she got banned from using, the search because of some post or whatever. So again, the same thing is happening today. So once you control the communication channel, you can control any sort of dissent. So in the past, you had this idea of, where the West would crush any revolt. The 1857 mutiny and uprising was brutally crushed. And the same thing is happening today, where any dissenting voices will be censored, or it could be silenced, put into a sort of faraway place, like algorithmic silencing. The idea is that you don't show such videos to the general public, you hide them, you lower their view counts, or increase their dislikes and things like that. And so in order to reduce the reach, basically, or outright ban such voices. So again, something similar is already happening. It's a norm these days. Every month or every week I see something like this, someone complaining, quite regular. Then there's idea of divide and rule. So the British, once you have the communication, once you are able to control the narrative, once you are able to control the technology, you have this monopoly, you can then sow divisions within the region based on religion, caste, or region. You give someone a good branded good and don't sell it to someone else, or you tax one one region or a caste little more, or give jobs to one religion more, etc., etc. So you have this sort of divide and rule once you have everything else in place. And the same thing is happening today. There is like a lot of fragmentation in society already happening. It's already happening in terms of language, religion, caste. But something new that is happening today is this idea of fragmenting the family unit, right? So you let's say there's a family with a male child, and this male child, this boy, is using a phone, and he's being fed a very different narrative than what his mother is being fed. So there is, like, it's called like algorithmic echo chambers, where you amplify this fragmentation. So the boy is living in another echo chamber, mother is living in another echo chamber, daughter is living in another echo chamber. So even the family unit now is getting to be fragmented more and more. So this is new this time, but a lot of similarities already. Then you have this idea, once you have done all this, then you can impose your culture. You can last time it happened with missionaries, with the education system and things like that. So Western clothes, Western culture, Western way of life. And again, the same thing is happening today, where you have content moderation, and digital, content moderation, and the digital values are being imposed from the based on based on that information flow, basically. And a very important similarity from the past is this idea of disempowered native kings or rulers, basically puppet kings, right? Who had no power, but they retained a lot of wealth and a lot of ceremonial status. And they lived a very lavish life, right? They were extremely rich and lived in palaces and stuff like that. And today it's similar. You have these sort of tech billionaires, or just billionaires in any industry in India, and they are able to operate within this limited space, but they don't really control any of the technology, right? So when I speak of technology, I'm not talking about consumer websites, right? Making a website is and even scaling it up or whatever, but it's still just a website, right? So I'm talking of like silicon chip manufacturing, or manufacturing materials like graphene, or having access to quantum computers, things like that, right? So this is all new technology, but even the old, the base technology is missing. And once you don't have that, then you are not really in a position to dictate you know the tech policy or any innovations and things like that. So again, very similar to what happened last time. And again, these sort of the you know the these the billionaires of India today, they're very rich. They have live lavish lifestyles. They have amazing weddings and cars, etc., but no real technology capability. And over here, you must have seen this huge wedding in India, this Ambani wedding, and there's this image of the son, Ambani's son, showing a very expensive watch to Mark Zuckerberg. So that's very, it was very revealing. So, and then Mark Zuckerberg was taken like, oh wow, good watch, in awe he was. But the fact is that Mark Zuckerberg can go tomorrow and buy 10 of those watches, but in India we cannot really get that technology, right? So it better to be on the other side where we have access to this technology, right? So a lot of similarities from the past, and the way things are going, it seems we are heading towards this sort of digital colonialism. So many similarities, right? So what happens if we do nothing, and if we let things go on as it is? The government will become helpless, basically, right? Where they can't set any rules, they can only react, because it's foreign infrastructure dependency which is dictating what's allowed. And that's already where we are seeing where IT services will be held hostage, will be used to hold Indian businesses as hostage, and then governments will obviously in a panic then agree to whatever tariffs or any sort of policy that is being dictated from abroad. Institutions, like schools, hospital, courts, etc., they will run on foreign code, using foreign technology, using foreign machinery. So what will happen is there will be no transparency in what is happening to the data. So imagine, there's a machine in a hospital. So what is happening to the data? Is that going abroad? Or if the courts, what the data of the courts and schools, is that going abroad, for example? So no control on the data. And also these Western companies, when they will give these institutions softwares and hardware to use for their day-to-day basis, they will set their standards. They will say that you can only use this computer if you allow us access to this security protocol and things like that. So again, there'll be so because we are following their standards, their biases will seep into the public domain and public services. Businesses will be held captive. We are already seeing that. They must, if they're operating using foreign cloud, app stores, ad networks, then they will be held hostage. Their margins could be squeezed. Their innovations will be capped, and there is no leverage against the gatekeepers. There's no leverage that business will have against Microsoft, for example. Niara has against Microsoft. They can't say or dictate terms. So they're basically captive in this situation. Citizens will be under an invisible control, right? Their behavior, their speech, their choices will be shaped by foreign algorithms, right? And this is something I study quite a lot. The idea of behavior manipulation using algorithms and things like that, right? And there is and the other important point is that there will be no recourse in case the citizens are deplatformed, or shadow banned, right? So let's say WhatsApp is banned in India tomorrow, then what will be used to communicate? So are there alternatives, indigenous, homegrown alternatives? And of course, as I mentioned, the citizen public will the citizen public data will be moved offshore, right? So the Western organizations will get access to Indian data and Indian citizens' data, and a lot can be done with that, you know. So I'll make another video on this later on. In case you're interested, just let me know. What happens to the talented amongst the Indians? It'll be brain drain 2.0, right? So the local minds will just go abroad. Probably not 2.0, probably 3.0, right? Because first brain drain was where, you know, in the colonial times the educated will go to UK to get educated. So this, you know, and then you have this brain drain for this IT revolution which happened recently. So you'll have the same thing repeating itself. So local minds will go abroad and help build foreign empires and not India's technology. Yeah, risk taking will stagnate, and you know, dependencies will be further deepened and stuff like that. So yeah, that's another issue. Internal security, or you know, the country's security will be exposed, right? So if the West controls the switch for our information, then they can just, you know, kill switch and stop our information flows. If they have access to all our you know, like our communications, then they very easy to survey us, right? So you know, WhatsApp or any of these companies can say that data is encrypted, but when push comes to shove, they can, you know, decrypt that, or things like that. And of course, you know, sanctions. So again, you know, if you don't like, they can impose sanctions and our security can weaken because of that. So overall, India loses command over its, you know, digital sovereignty in terms of crisis. And you know, this and this tech backbone cannot be guaranteed that during wartime. So if any, you know, situation goes towards a war, then all these things you know, will have a big impact on the country. And of course, once all of this happens, then our national identity corrodes. Yeah, regional languages all will converge towards English. Our ethics will become that of the West. Our narratives will be set by algorithms, you know, and the Western worldview becomes our default Indian worldview. So this idea of Bharat will become a ghost, you know, if we do nothing, that is. So is there any hope? It's been pretty gloomy, the content so far, and unfortunately that is the case. Like, in our colonial history has been extremely depressing. However, is there hope moving forward? And the answer is a big yes. Right? So I'll give you 3 examples where Indians have been able to innovate. The first is this idea of ISRO, right, where they have like a very frugal and a very successful space program. And you know, and there are like images where they used parts from borrowed rockets. You know, they borrowed parts from other rockets, and you know, they carried their rockets and things like that on a bicycle. And now they are, you know, they have launched their own satellites at very marginal costs and things like that. So they were able to leapfrog by many decades. The other example is of Covaxin, where you know, during the COVID time, the whole world was hoping that foreign pharma giants will give them the vaccination, but India took a very risky bet, and they developed their own vaccine, and they were able to even share this with the global south. And so this is another success story when they, you know, which shows that India can innovate. Another example is of Geo, you know, where the story that I've heard is that Mukesh Ambani's daughter comes from the West and tells him that India does not have good internet, and he takes it as a personal challenge to make sure India has really good internet, and he launches this Geo network, right? This, and it very low cost pan India 4G network from scratch. There was nothing back then, and you know, because of that cheap data, you have this sort of banking revolution in India, you know, digital revolution in India. That's all because of that infrastructure that was created by you know, through Geo. So, and it was just sheer will, right? This one person decided that, okay, I'm going to do it, so it happens. But then it's important to note that all these examples are exceptions. They're not the rule, it's not the norm. So all these examples we take as heroism, that oh wow, ISRO did this, or oh wow, India was able to create Covaxin, but it's not the norm. Right? When the vaccine issue came about, it was expected that the West pharma giants will be able to create the vaccines. It was the norm that it was expected that they'll innovate and they'll do it. Silicon Valley is expected to innovate. NASA is expected to innovate, but an innovation from ISRO, from the where India creates its own co-vaccine, that's celebrated. So that's just telling of how far back in the game we are. And the idea is to move forward. We need a framework where we are systematic about the way we innovate, and so that is the key for us. So we need a framework, and that's what I'll introduce. It's a framework I have just thought about and based on my academic and my experience. So that's what I'll introduce in the next video, where we'll talk about what are the different components and structures, put them in a structured manner, systematic manner. And once we have that in place, we can see who are the key actors and what role they play. Then we can decide and map the dependencies, the gaps, and the failure points. And also what are the accountability structures, right? We can put in some measures to see who is innovating and who is performing their role in a system as needed. And we can simulate different scenarios and anticipate, weakest link. And once all of that is in place, and hopefully if it gets in play, right, if it's put in motion, then everyone is aligned towards moving towards this idea of digital sovereignty, or digital Swaraj, as I mentioned previously. So I'll introduce that in the next video. This video has already become quite long, and and I'll take it from there. So in case you like this video, or if you have any questions, please do put that. I'll give it a read. As I mentioned, this was the first time I'm doing it, so forgive me if this is like not good quality editing and things like that. However, I look forward to your comments and look forward to sharing the next video with you soon too. Thank you.